Hi, my name is Johnny. I'm from England and I've been living here in Moscow for 9 years. This video comes to you from the city's Taganski region. I make videos here in Russia about what life is actually like, and one of the most important things I do, in my opinion, is looking at Western stories, news reports, headlines about Russia, and just giving my opinion on how close I think they are to the truth, if they're correct, if something's been misrepresented, and sort of explain how things really are. And recently there's been a big story about Russians supposedly running to the banks, taking cash out and essentially stuffing it under their mattress. And those articles started coming out this month, which is August 2026, as I record and as I upload it. And it's come from several international outlets, started in the US, which basically reported that Russian people were getting worried about the state of the economy, and they'd sort of en masse gone to their banks, emptied out their bank accounts, with some headlines suggesting that this is a sign that Russians are essentially losing confidence in the Russian economy or the integrity of the Russian financial system. And in fact, some of these articles, some commentators, experts claim that Russians are now increasingly afraid that the government is going to freeze accounts or maybe even seize their cash to help fund the war in Ukraine. But what is actually happening? I want to answer that in this video. Is it true that Russians are really rushing to empty their bank accounts, or is the reality a little bit more complicated? Well, the first thing to say is that this is actually a real news story here in Russia too. Russians really are withdrawing more cash than usual. In fact, according to official data from Russia's central bank, the country has recorded a sharp rise in the amount of physical cash circulating in the economy, with hundreds of billions of rubles moving out of the banking system and into physical cash during the summer of 2026, these last 3 months. There's several major Russian banks have also reported that customers are reducing their deposits. Those are Gazprom Bank, Roselhozbank, Sovcombank and Alfa Bank, which have all recorded a noticeable decline in household deposits on record in their banks. So on a basic surface level, this claim is true. Russians really have been taking more money out of banks. But the more interesting question, I think, is why? And does that mean that Russia's banking system is on the verge of a total collapse? A true bank run happens when people believe that banks could fail and everyone collectively runs to the bank to take their money out of their accounts, put it under their mattress, make sure it's in a safe place before the bank goes bust and their money disappears into thin air. And that does not appear to be happening here today in Russia. In fact, when compared to date from August 2025 to August 2026, exactly a year ago, household deposits have actually gone up. They are higher than they were 12 months ago. So, of course, that means that Russians haven't just collectively emptied their bank accounts and abandoned the banking system. That's even if there are a few banks that have reported falling deposit figures. However, that yearly comparison is quite simplistic, as it hides what has really been a rocky summer, a rocky few months really. Because actually deposit growth here in Russia nearly ground to a halt in late 2025. And in one point in early this year, early 2026, people actually pulled more money out of long-term savings accounts than they put in. So, like I said, things are not really that simple. Instead, what actually appears to be happening is several different factors to do with the economy, to do with the banking system, and to do with politics, all coming together at the same time. Now, one explanation, the first explanation I will give, is quite practical, and that's concerns about Russian payment systems. And this is the sort of the official explanation promoted by the Central Bank of Russia itself. So this is a government really explanation. And that's that in many Russian regions, there's been lots of mobile internet disruptions, and that has affected people's ability to use banking apps, make online payments, and rely on card transactions. I've had that very, very rarely here in Moscow, and that's because this is the capital. We're quite protected here, but outside of the capital, things are quite different. Lots of times, internet goes down and a card terminal won't work. If you don't have cash, you can't buy the thing you want to buy. So for ordinary people outside of the capital, the logic is straightforward. If there's a chance that your phone won't work, there's a chance that a banking app won't load, there's a chance that electronic payments suddenly become unreliable, then keeping some cash in your wallet feels like a very sensible and obvious precaution. Now, on top of that, there have been some taxation changes for businesses, and these two sort of these are the two explanations basically combined. The official narrative here from the Russian government, the Central Bank of Russia, is pushing. Now, if we move away from the official narratives, some economists have actually offered other explanations, and the main one of those is interest rates. You see, for much of the past few years, especially since the war, Russian banks have offered very attractive returns on deposits, and they've put extremely high interest rates on deposits to encourage Russian people to keep their money in the country. 20%, 21%, 22%. This has encouraged people to keep their savings in banks rather than holding physical cash. But interest rates now are coming down. Now you're looking at rates between 11 to 13, 14%. And some people see this as basically less reason to leave money locked away in deposits. Now, of course, if you're in the West, same to me, 11% is still a huge return. But the thing to note here is that moving money into other forms outside of these accounts does not necessarily mean that people have lost faith in banks. It's sometimes just a reaction to changing economic conditions. You were getting 24%, now you're getting 12%. Your interest rate has halved, and even though that seems high, still to us, it's still half of what people were used to, and that's one of the reasons that economists say that people are saving less in bank accounts. And then there's another explanation, the headline-grabbing explanation. That headline-grabbing explanation is the one you've been seeing in Western newspapers in the past couple of weeks. It's been posited by lots of experts, commentators on Russia, and that is very, very simply what drives so much economic and financial decisions, and it always has: fear. Because recently we've seen rumours swirl throughout Russia, mainly pushed through social media, that the government could restrict access to people's deposits. There's also been concerns that the Kremlin could even take people's savings out of their accounts to fund the war. Now, there's actually no evidence that the Russian government is preparing to confiscate ordinary people's savings. And I mean, of course, it's unlikely that the central bank itself would actually say it's coming, but they've denied it, I think, as you'd expect. But of course, you can take that for what it's worth with a pinch of salt. However, on top of that, there's some sort of other evidence that this is not going to happen, because it's actually been proved that the initial scaremongering about this topic came, I think it was April or May. It came from fake documents, it came from forged, fabricated documents, and it was then shared on Telegram, it was passed around social media, basically what was claimed to be leaked internal Central Bank of Russia documents. So it was basically a fake that started this domino chain reaction of where we are today. Now, that said, some comments by some Russian politicians have really helped amplify concerns. They're basically they're not really helping out like the whole situation of fear here. Most obviously, that's Gennady Zyuganov, a very well-known politician here, who publicly proposed that the government should confiscate tens of trillions of rubles to help fund the war. So, of course, that started something. That started people thinking, wait, one of the most famous politicians in the country is saying it, maybe it's true. So then again, I have to say, is fear playing a role? Are Russians really putting their cash, putting it under the pillow, afraid that Putin will steal it? And I would say that maybe some people do feel that way, especially based on politicians' comments. I think it would be incredibly unrealistic to say, in fact, that nobody in Russia feels uncertain about government decisions. After years of sanctions, wartime restrictions and increasing economic pressure, it's only natural for people to have a little bit of wariness. But it's impossible really to know exactly how much of the increase in cash withdrawals is caused by fear and how much comes from just normal, everyday, practical concerns. And I think the reality is probably that several things are happening at the same time on top of each other in layers. Some people are withdrawing cash because they believe the rumours that there's possibly going to be restrictions in the future and their deposits are going to be frozen. And others may simply want a backup option because of these constant internet disruptions that are stopping you from buying things. And then there's another layer on top of that, and that's businesses, because businesses now need more physical money because of the changes in the economy, while ordinary savers like you and me may be reacting to lower interest rates. So, in conclusion, are Russians withdrawing their money en masse? The answer to that question is yes and no. Yes, cash withdrawals have increased significantly, and the trend, I would say, is large enough to attract attention from serious economists and, of course, the international media, the American media. But no evidence does actually not suggest that Russia is experiencing a nationwide bank run where everyone's trying to rescue their savings before the financial system or the banking system collapses. I would say the sort of more accurate picture here that Russia is a country where people are incredibly cautious now after years and years of war and after years of keeping their savings inside the banking system. Some people, probably logically now, are deciding to at least have some physical cash. Well, they're deciding that it's a good idea, really. It's a decent idea to just have a few thousand rubles at home. And I would say, basically, in uncertain times, confidence really is not all about whether your money actually exists anymore. It's more about whether you feel that you can access it in a pinch when you need to. And that's probably now what's driving people's actions in Russia today.